Alright, last one. This SpongeBob episode is Season 1, Episode 40, and it's called Hooky, and it's kind of a cheesy title, but it makes sense. Starts out with the narrator showing how I guess it's that time of year when the fishermen start, fishing, and then SpongeBob's cleaning the tables and stuff, and underneath the tables, and he's using himself instead of like a mop or something since he's a sponge. And Mr. Krabs is in a panic. He's like, the hooks, and then he goes to up one guy and he says it to him. He's like, how about a mint? Because I guess he had bad breath. And one of the customers that was ordering asked Squidward, can I get that to go? And Squidward's like, you have no idea how lucky you are. And then Squidward, Mr. Krabs is about to tell Squidward the story, but Squidward finds some lame excuse how he has to do his garbage expectations or something. No. Yeah, how he has to look and he just uses an excuse. And then Mr. Krabs says, don't say I didn't warn you. And SpongeBob's like, well, about what? And then Mr. Krabs tells him about the hooks, how they dangle around, and you think you're coming down there for like treats, but then all of a sudden they hook you, and then they give you higher and higher and higher, and then you're floating. And then Mr. Krabs tells SpongeBob how you're floating up in the air with nothing but into the surface with no water, how you die. And then they talk about how they cook you, they eat you, or worse. And Mr. SpongeBob's like, what's worse? Gift shop. And then it shows like a gift shop with all like the starfish and with all like the dead creatures. And SpongeBob's scared. He's hiding underneath like a bin, and he's like, don't let them get me, Mr. Krabs. And Mr. Krabs says, don't worry, boy, they won't get you, not as long as you listen to old Mr. Krabs. So then he tells him to get back to work, and he does. And instead of just getting out of there, he crawls into the barrel, into the kitchen. SpongeBob does. And then Patrick, I guess they have a window, and I don't remember the Krusty Krab kitchen having a window, if I am mistaken. And Patrick tells SpongeBob that the carnival's back in town, and SpongeBob's like, and he wants SpongeBob to go with them, but SpongeBob says, I can't go now, I'm working. And then Patrick's like, don't think of it as leaving, we're just taking a break. So then SpongeBob goes with them, which really I guess wasn't hard to talk him into, and then Patrick and SpongeBob are going to the carnival, and as they're leaving, Patrick eats shit again. He did it in the Texas episode, and he did it again. He ate shit. And then we see the carnival, and SpongeBob's like, this is the weirdest carnival. Where is everybody? And Patrick even mentions how there was one kid here earlier, and then we know what happened to him. And then SpongeBob's like, what? This is the strangest looking carnival I've ever seen. And then he bumps into something, and he's like, excuse me, sir. And then he realizes that it's the hooks. So obviously we know what happened to that kid. He got hooked. So then Patrick says that this place is really dangerous. He tries to tell him to warn him, but Patrick's like, I sense no danger here. I mean, they're covered with free cheese. So then he puts them in his mouth, and he puts like a ton of them in his mouth, like all of them. And then someone was like, please don't, let's just get out of here or something. Pat was like, come on, aren't you gonna eat, or I have to eat all these cheese by myself? And then the hook pulls him up, and then SpongeBob panics. He thinks Patrick's just gone, but then we see Patrick had floated down, and then SpongeBob's like, Patrick, you're alive. And then Patrick says, am I ever? You should try it. And SpongeBob's like, but Mr. Krabs says I shouldn't get any of those things. And Patrick said, we see that one that looks like a horse. So Patrick, like, did he say you couldn't climb on top of him and ride him like a horsey? SpongeBob's like, no, I guess not. And he even mentions that you can just jump off before you get up to land, too. And then they start riding him like a horsey, and then they get pulled up, and the fishermen are trying to pull him up. They're struggling, but then they jump off, and then SpongeBob even says, "This is more fun than double over time back at the Krusty Krab." So then we see the fishermen are all, I guess, exhausted and disappointed that they didn't catch anything. And then we see the customers are eating the Krabby Patties, and one of them says that my patty tastes like a fried boot, and one of the customers' patties, one of the other customers says, my sandwich is a fried boot. So then they're all yelling at Squidward, telling him how to flip him, and Squidward's like, "Why do you want to eat this stuff anyways?" And then Mr. Krabs is like, "Mr. Squidward, what the hell is going on in here?" And Squidward's like, "It's a feeding frenzy." And SpongeBob's not back from his break, and Mr. Krabs laughs and he's like, "Thought you said SpongeBob was taking a break." He says like no one's taking a break since like a certain time, but he pretty much no one's taken a break at the Krusty Krab for like years. And Mr. Krabs like, "So what did you say?" And Squidward says he took a break. So then Mr. Krabs' arms and nose fall off, and Mr. Krabs is gonna go search for him, and he mentions how this nose can smell laziness from like 10,000 paces or something. So he's like, "I'll give you a break, you won't soon forget." And then Squidward says, "But Mr. Krabs, I still need help because the customers are still pissed at him." And then Mr. Krabs goes to the hooks, and then SpongeBob and he sees SpongeBob and Patrick float down, and they go on the hooks again. And Mr. Krabs tries to get them in time before the hook lifts him up, but he wasn't quick enough, and he gets all upset. He's like, "I wasn't quick enough. If only I could hold him in my arms again. I." And then they float down, and he says, "I throw them." Then he's like, "What did I tell you about those hooks, SpongeBob?" And then Patrick's like, "I'll tell you about the hooks." Then he meant to tell you ride them up, and then how you gently float down, and then Mr. Krabs is like, "You know what happens when you don't float back down?" And then SpongeBob's like, "Gift shot." It's like, worse. He talks about how you end up vacuum packed inside in a can of tuna, and then we see actually like the picture of a tuna, and he's like, with nothing to look forward to but the smell of mayonnaise. And then we see a mayonnaise, and then SpongeBob and Patrick apologize. Mr. Krabs makes them promise never to go near the hooks, and he actually has them do a sailor's promise. He's like, yo ho, near the hooks we'll never go." And then afterwards one of the hooks stabs him, and he's like, "Yee, mother of pearl, fire on the poop deck." And then they repeat that, and he's like, and then they get out of there. Then SpongeBob is back at home, and he tells Gary that he's gonna make like a fresh start today. And then he goes and Patrick's like, "Hey SpongeBob, you're going out of the wrong way." And SpongeBob's like, "I always go to work this way." And Patrick's like, "You're not going to work today. We're gonna go play a game." And he talks about the hooks, and SpongeBob's like, "But Patrick, we promised." And Patrick's like, "Well, I have my fingers crossed." And SpongeBob's like, "We don't have any fingers, Patrick." He's like, and he mentions how Mr. Krabs is a big dummy, how they played on the hooks all day yesterday, and nothing happened to them. And Patrick's like, "Are you gonna?" And SpongeBob's like, "But I promised." And Patrick's like, "Look, SpongeBob, are you gonna listen to a big dummy, or are you gonna listen to me?" And it was kind of funny hearing him say that, because Patrick is a dummy. So it's kind of funny hearing him say that, because that's like his whole character and stuff. And SpongeBob's like, and then Patrick goes to and starts, doing the same thing as he was on the hooks. And SpongeBob's like, "I want to go, but I promised Mr. Krabs that I wouldn't go near another hook." And then a hook's right in front of him, and SpongeBob's like, "Oh no, Mr. Krabs told me all about you. You are a liar, a deceiver. I'll never fall for your tricks again, never." But then he ends up riding the hook, and SpongeBob's like, "I'm glad I got that out of my system." And then he ends up getting hooked. So then he realizes what's going to happen, how he's going to be vacuum packing the tuna, and then it shows like a picture of him in the tuna. And SpongeBob's like, so then SpongeBob tries to go for Mr. Krabs for help, and then we see Mr. Krabs and his daughter Pearl and her friends are all there, and he gives them free water and tells her not to forget to leave a tip for Mr. Krabs. And SpongeBob tells him, remember the conversation, comes to the Krusty Krab, and Mr. Krabs is like, "SpongeBob, you're 2 minutes late. What kept you?" He's like, "Remember those hooks we were playing on yesterday?" And he's like, "Yeah." "Remember those hooks you told me about yesterday?" And he's like, "Yeah, you weren't playing on the hooks, were you, laddie?" He's like, well, oh, of course not. And then the Hook pulls him. He's like, well, not exactly. And then the Hook pulls him again. He's like, okay. And then he admits it. He starts crying and says, I'm so ashamed. I should have listened to you or something. And he's like, look at me, I'm hooked. And Mr. Krabs is like, it's in there pretty deep, isn't it? And then SpongeBob's like, what do I do? And then Mr. Krabs is like, there's only one thing to do, boy. And then SpongeBob realizes what he has to do. And he's like, I can't take off my pants, not in front of all these girls. And then the Hook starts pulling him. And SpongeBob's like, okay, I'm taking him off. So then he takes him off. But he's still hooked. It's hooked onto his underwear. And he's like, so SpongeBob's like, no, I can't do anything but that. And then Mr. Krabs is like, I understand. And he tells SpongeBob that he was a good fry cook. And he puts a help wanted sign. He's like, but we'll find another. And he says, hopefully, one little listen to good old Mr. Krabs. And SpongeBob is like, no, Mr. Krabs, I'll listen, I promise. And then he tries to grab a flower, but he breaks. And he's trying to hold on to the Krusty Krab, the big sign that they have there. But, so he can't get hooked. And he's like, please save me, Mr. Krabs. I promise I'll be good. And then the Hook ends up breaking his underwear. Now when I first saw it, I was like, what the hell? What happened? So then he's like, who? And then the sign throws SpongeBob, and he ends up right in front of the door, and he's naked, by the way. And then the girls are like, oh, look. And Pearl's like, it's SpongeBob nudie pants. And SpongeBob's so embarrassed right now, and we find out that Hook was a trick. It was actually Squidward. Mr. Squidward's like, well, that was all the SpongeBob that I needed to see. And Mr. Krabs like, oh, Mr. Squidward, that was some fine angling. And Mr. Krabs like, do you think the lads learned his lesson? And Squidward's like, oh, I'm sure you'll remember this for a long time. Well, I will. And then SpongeBob runs back to his house because he's so embarrassed. And then we see a bus come, and it's Patrick inside the tuna. And it ends with Patrick saying, hello? Does anybody have a can opener? So that's how it ended. And I thought this was a good episode, too. Pretty entertaining, and easy to sit through, and it shows that that lesson that you taught here is don't cross Mr. Krabs. I just thought of something though. Why did they need to teach SpongeBob a lesson? I understand they didn't listen, but why didn't they teach Patrick a lesson? I wonder if they never warned Patrick about it, but oh well. But that's pretty much it, guys. I finally got all caught up. I hope I don't get this far behind next time, but we'll see what happens. That's all I have to say, and peace out. Subscribe to this channel and all the other channels down below, by the way, I should mention.